It's a great question. I mean, I think there's always pushback to any form of change.
How do you automate this whole entire process so that humans are effectively out of the loop?
I'm not sure I actually remember how to tie a tie. Maybe clip-ons will make a comeback.
I think most people want to do their job, they want to do it well, and they want to produce work. They don't want to sit and do drudge work. Hey, good morning, David. How are you today? Welcome back.
Hey, thank you, Peter. Good morning. How you doing?
I am good. Back from the weekend and,
Yes.
feeling a bit relaxed.
Excellent. You look
Yeah,
relaxed.
I do. Thank you.
It's a cloudy Monday morning, but it's a Monday morning. We made it to another week, so I guess that's good.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's sunny over here, so it ain't too bad. But hey, I don't mind. Maybe later on I'll go to the beach or something. I don't know. We'll see. Um,
Yeah,
but I see
go for it.
another Aloha shirt. I got to comment on as always. I cannot not comment on the
Yeah, I
Aloha
think
shirt.
this is a repeat, but hey, it's a good one. So,
It's a good one, though.
or a bad one, depending on your point of view. Maybe it's a terrible one, but I like it. So, you know, it's
I like it.
one of the benefits of being an adult is you get to dress yourself in the morning. So, you get to pick what you want.
I'm sure sometimes it's not a good or bad thing. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I
It's
gotta put
there's
my
mixed.
mixed bag. I
It
will say
definitely can
this:
be a
working
mixed
from home,
bag.
my start. Oh, absolutely. My sartorial choices now working from home have definitely dramatically not nearly as good.
I don't know about you, but I am really living in fear of the first time I have to put on a tie again because I'm not sure I actually remember how to tie a tie.
You're gonna laugh.
Like,
Periodically, I actually mentally go through the process of tying a tie in case I have to tie a tie because I'm worried that if I have to tie a tie, it's been so long, even though I have 100 ties, that I can't remember how to do all the knots.
maybe clip-ons will make a comeback.
Oh God, no! Yeah.
You never
I
know.
I wouldn't be surprised. Hey, look, stranger things have happened in this world, so I can't say anything. Anyway,
It's true.
David, I think we have a good episode today. I think we got
Yeah,
some interesting
I was
content
looking
to talk
forward to
about.
this one because this is based on something you and I had a discussion about last week, and I think we found it, really interesting to explore. So, definitely looking forward to this.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I think, and it's not a topic that I've seen crop up anywhere, to be honest. In the 10,000 feeds and things that we read on a regular basis, but in one of our ideation conversations that you and I have, like I don't know, every day, it was something that you come up with. I thought this is actually a brilliant way of approaching some interesting problems out there, or just I should say, in regular business problems that happen to be very costly to organizations.
Yeah, yeah, I think these are we can address a whole set of problems with this approach, and let's not keep everyone in suspense anymore, right? The approach is what we have referred to in the past as embedded AI.
Right. Well, let's be clear about the definition of what we're talking about when we say embedded AI. It's not embedded in, say, PowerPoint, for instance. I mean, that's a form of embedded AI, but that is not what we're talking about at all.
Yeah, no, we're talking about it. It's interesting because I think what is most apparent to people when they start using AI for the first time is like, oh, it can write my emails for me, it can do my calendaring for me, it
Right,
can, summarize long documents that I don't feel like reading. I group all of those into personal productivity uses of AI. It's a human being using AI
right,
as an assistant, as a tool. And look, make no mistake, it's amazing, it's great. I encourage everybody to use
right.
it. Um, but there is a whole other frontier of amazing applications of AI that are embedded AI, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I kind of said what it isn't. Why
Right.
don't you say what it is?
No, I think that's a great way of kind of framing this. So what we view embedded AI is are agents or agent processes executing within an organization doing their work independently of everything else. And I think these are processes that you would kick off maybe for regulatory issues or for compliance issues, issues that I always refer to as a very large corporate tax on an organization or a very large tax on an organization because they typically take a lot of time for consultancies to come in and look at thousands of pages of documentation and speak to people. So begs the question is, can this be automated with something that's embedded and continuous and always there keeping you quote unquote honest?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, I think a lot of organizations maybe have a little bit of a fear moment when they hear agentic AI because, there's something
Right,
a little bit nefarious sometimes about thinking about letting agents loose inside your organization. And so I just point out that while the best use, the most impactful uses of agentic AI or of embedded AI are using agents, you don't have to use agents to do this, right? You can just build
right.
calls to AI models into applications. And it's by doing so, you've embedded it deeply into an application or a business process. But, clearly
Right.
using agentic approaches is even more flexible and even more powerful. But I just want to call that out that it doesn't have to mean immediately jumping into the deep agent end of the AI pool.
No, I think you're right, and that's an excellent point. In fact, it wasn't one that agents always stick in my head for some reason, but I think you're absolutely correct. It's like you said, embedding this into internal applications is important in another approach to solving some of these problems. So why don't we riff maybe on a bit of a use case for a little bit, Dave? What do you think? Kind of bring this
Let's do
down
it.
to brass tacks and how it would work. I think in a real system and frame the problem a little bit better. So, and I was thinking maybe we start with, you and I obviously having worked in finance for, decades of our life are well versed in that space and, have gone through, some of the regulatory challenges and compliance issues. And those things are common amongst other industries as well. It's just what you and I
Yeah.
know better. But we know this is something, and, having been on projects with customers, we know the cost to an organization in doing this type of work. So I don't know, maybe you want to kind of walk us through what you think is how
Yeah.
costly it is or how it is for an organization.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the way companies do this today. And just to keep everything simple, I'm just going to say, compliance with someone's policies and procedures. Right. Whether or not those policies and procedures are regulatory related, banks, financial services companies, and honestly, companies in every industry, every sector, have policies and procedures that they want to ensure they're complying with.
Right,
At banks, especially, this is an expensive and time consuming proposition. So it probably works like this: people who are doing a job are trained in the policies and procedures. They have to periodically refresh their knowledge of policies and procedures, and they're supposed to be following those when they do their work. But the bank
right,
also then identifies, say, likely failure points. They use a risk analysis and they come up with things that might not always happen according to plan, and they implement controls. And a control
right,
is just a fancy name for like a safety measure. It can be as simple as someone else checks your work, a maker checker type control. It can be all sorts of other, documentation controls that you go into a log and you check off that you did the thing you were supposed to do. It can be automated quality checks. So tons of different controls. But then
right,
what gets more interesting and more expensive is because even those controls can fail, you want to sort of be improving your processes over time. We tend to see companies hiring auditors or consultants to come in and do these periodic reviews. And they take
right,
a historical sample of work done, they look at the controls, they look at the evidence, and they sort of say, did it work? Were the controls followed? Were the procedures and policies followed? Are there gaps here that we don't know about? And they also reassess the environment and say, are your policies and procedures okay, or do they need to be updated? And this is just this,
right,
endless cycle of checking and
hmm
double checking and reviewing and assessing, and
right,
especially the assessing because it's periodic is usually done by an outside consultant. And you
right.
could just imagine the drag on productivity and earnings that this feels like sometimes. It's an expensive proposition, but super important for keeping everyone safe and making sure that banks operate correctly. Um,
Right.
that's the current state, right? And anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a good way of framing it. And you and I, well, look, I've sat in many of those meetings with, compliance folks or attorneys, and you sit there and you go through the process and you're estimating questions, and it is, obviously it's a necessity that organizations have to adhere to, but it is a costly tax in productivity in an organization. And so you and I were chatting the other day and came up with like, well, how do you automate this whole entire process so that humans are effectively out of the loop? And it's not a once and done or a once a year process where you're spending $4, $5, $10 million on external consulting fees to do this for you. And there's a way to do it continuously, so you never really fall behind.
Right.
You're always up to date on where you're at. It's kind of a real time snapshot of your issues and making so the old proverb in engineering is when you catch some design catching design issues at the beginning is a lot less costly than catching them at the end, and it's a lot less expensive to catch these issues before they become massive problems. So, is there a way to do this?
Yeah, and I also have to throw in the other analogy that my dad always used, and I'm sure as a woodworker you'll appreciate it. It's the old measure twice, cut once.
I know, but
Um,
once. Yep, absolutely holds
yep.
true.
Yeah. So how do you do this? I mean, what we were talking about the other day, and have begun to do some work on, is the idea of a compliance agent. And I think this is
Right.
we'll use this for now as a good example of an embedded AI. And a compliance agent basically is the idea that we'll stand up an agent that will, first of all, read, ingest, and understand all of the policies and procedures and know what is supposed to happen.
Right.
And then we will
Right.
connect that agent to documents and electronic signals that are evidence of and describing the work that
Mm,
is happening. And the job of that agent is basically going to be to assess how closely is the actual work that's happening following
right.
the policies and procedures that spell out how it should happen. Um,
Right.
and what's cool about that is you can, first of all, you can have it give real time updates so it can monitor in real time and say, oh, wait,
Mm,
you're about to send this email, but you didn't get this counter check done. You should do that first. Right. You can actually stop a problem
right.
before it occurs because it's like a real time, intelligent, like almost like a super person
Mm,
sitting there watching everything. um, but what's
right.
more cool, and I'll let you talk about this because what's more cool is the idea that it could also be adaptive. It could be reading changes to policies and procedures, changes to laws, and sort of adapt probably more
Right.
quickly than humans can adapt. You want to riff on that
Now,
adaptation for a second?
yeah. Oh, I love riffing on things. You know that. As you said the other day, you and I could take a short sentence and riff on it for 2 hours. Yeah, no, I think that's. I think this is what I love, and you know me. I've always been I shouldn't say. Oh, I love the concept of ingesting real time information and making decisions based on that. I mean, it's my
Yeah.
background in trading systems, but being able to pull in real time information, maybe it's compliance issues or regulatory law changes or whatever they may be, and being able to adapt on the fly, I think is from an organizational standpoint highly cost effective, and I would say in some way it keeps you out of trouble. Now, I kind of view this agent, maybe process agent, whatever you want to call it, as a tool or as obviously a software tied to LLMs or a series of LLMs, some of which may be fine tuned on some of the laws that are out there or whatever approach to decide to take, but continuously ingesting information. And based on that information and set of I don't know, parameters or scripts or prompts that we execute on, will tell you where you are in the process. And that's just something that, like I said, continuously runs in the background, ingesting all this information. But the key thing is obviously things always going around in the world constantly. There's always changes. There's always, global compliance changes. And if you're a bank that has global regulatory challenges and, 47 different countries, being able to ingest this information on a real time basis in an automated fashion is going to allow you. And this same problem exists in pharmaceuticals as well. Be able to take all its information and assess your internal documentation, maybe even assess your internal texts and messages, and generate warnings way ahead of anything else. And rather than get a warning from, say, the Fed, once a year of a whole list of things you have to remediate, you're being ahead of that. Because everybody knows if you get what MRI or MRIA, which are these serious warning letters you get from the Fed, rather than get one of those, you're walking into technically an evaluation with a firm and saying, "Oh, we're all done. Here's everything just kind of laid out. Everything is all generated already." It makes I would say, it makes many CFOs quite happy, or many risk managers quite happy. It just organizationally, it just makes life, I think, a lot easier for a company. Um,
Yeah.
it's
No,
it's
I think
powerful.
I think it absolutely it's amazingly powerful. And I think there's even a place for maybe a special variant of that agent, like an early warning agent that actually goes
Yeah.
and reads. specific sources that you tell it to trust about, maybe pending
Right.
regulatory changes or even rule changes being discussed or safety measures being discussed in your industry. And it doesn't enforce them, but it comes back and gives you real-time feedback saying, hey, if
Right.
this rule was in place, here's where you would have to change. Here's things that you're doing that would need to be modified to meet the rule. Like, imagine that versus what happens now, which is, you know, you go through this expensive process redesign and evaluation if you have to make a substantial change to how you operate. Um,
Right. Right. No, I agree. Now, just something that kind of hit me as you were chatting away. A couple of questions. I mean, from an internal standpoint, do you think there would be significant pushback on something like this?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's always pushback to any form of change, right? Even when Casual
Right.
Friday was introduced, and I got to break out the Aloha shirts, there's pushback from people who are like, "No, we show up to work in a suit and tie every day. What do you mean you can wear khakis on a Friday, right?" So yeah,
Right.
there will be pushback. I think the real thing, and this comes back to something you and I talk about all the time, which is how do you manage the people side of this? How do you manage the cultural,
Right.
behavioral impacts of this? And I think if I were rolling this out, I would certainly start by um, having a compliance agent issue gentle warnings, not stop a process, not be able to immediately, force something to happen, but to issue reminders and
Right.
warnings. And I would also do it at the personal level. I wouldn't want to set it up as like, this is the agent that's going to be a tattletale and go tell your boss you did something wrong. You want it to be something that offers reinforcement to the person
Right.
saying, hey, did you forget this? Right.
Right.
Because that's the difference between like an agent that's a spy on you and reporting to your boss versus an agent that's actually your helper and is got your back, as it were.
So augmented AI
Yeah, augmented
as
intelligence,
in.
it's something we talk about a lot. How do you make AI augment an individual's work and job and life and not try to replace them or try to control them? So
Right. I
yeah.
think the important thing here with something like this is to kind of view it as a partner in helping you eliminate potential issues before they become issues. And look, I'm a big fan of
Yeah.
proactive management and getting ahead of problems before they become real problems and identifying things before they become big issues. And to me, this is another tool that would facilitate that. I mean, I think if I'm a CFO, again, a risk manager, or a CEO, I'm going, wow, this is an awesome idea. I can not only save quite a bit of money and bring it in house, but reduce my risk as well and hopefully keep people satisfied. But what about the idea, and just to switch topics a little bit, obviously your internal risk managers and your compliance folks have a lot of embedded knowledge. I mean, they've been working in an organization for some cases many decades. They understand the rules and regulations. They kind of understand the nuance or, around some of these things and encoding that knowledge in a agent within an organization. You think that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's interesting because there's a certain set of skills and probably also a capacity you have to be in a risk and compliance or audit or a similar role, right?
Right,
You've got to be able to think in a very structured way. But what you miss when you come into a new company, if a new person is hired, is how do you bring them up to speed with what's been done and how the company operates and how it wants to operate and sort of what their,
right,
maybe the between the lines part of how they actually run things. And
right,
if you could train an agent by having it ingest, decades worth of risk reports, decades worth of internal audit or other internal safety reviews and things like that, you could very
right.
quickly come up to speed. Have an agent that, in a couple of hours understands the entire history of how the company operates, which is phenomenal.
Right. Yeah, no, I know, I 100% agree with you. I think it absolutely is. I mean, and I think it's a lot of ideas kind of churning around my head as we're talking here. If you were sitting with a CFO or again, chief risk officer in the firm, and again, the point here isn't to replace internal people with some of these applications. It's really to give you
Right.
help in identifying and again being proactive. But if you would sit with somebody like that and say, hey, David, where do I start with this? Where do I go? How hard is it to do something like this? Where do you start?
I think. probably the very first place I would start is by reminding them that what we're talking about is maybe new to knowledge work, but it is not new to industry in general. This concept that we're
Right,
talking about, which is, real-time monitoring of how a process is working. It has existed for a long time in manufacturing, for example, right?
right,
Where
right,
there's hardly a factory out there today that doesn't have a variety of different sensors on the assembly line, on machines, on logistics and distribution mechanisms. Everything is barcoded and tracked. Machines use optical and
right.
audio sensors to see how the machine is running. I mean, this has been part and parcel of the way that high tech manufacturing and now even less high tech manufacturing has worked for a long time. What's different about what we can do today with generative AI is we can finally apply this concept to human knowledge workers. We can apply it to
Right.
output that isn't, a piece of steel milled to a certain specification. It's a document or it's an email or it's a spreadsheet. So we can, we finally can go truly multimodal on this stuff and apply this sort of, continuous monitoring and safety approach to human output, not just industrial output. And so I would start there with the CFO and say, look, like this is not like we're not talking about breaking new ground philosophically. We're talking about catching up to what other industries are doing and have seen tremendous value in doing for 20, 30 years
Right.
now. Right.
No, I love that
And then
analogy. I think that's a brilliant analogy using the manufacturing one. I'm sorry, go ahead, finish. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no. I'll just say, because I hadn't actually answered your question, I sort of went off on that. The analogy is, you know, I would pick a specific place to start. I would take one process, one small process, but a process that's complex enough
Right,
to have a lot of nuance, to require some controls, and to, um, you know, potentially need fine tuning. Like you don't want to start with the process that you know is perfect, because having the AI agent monitor a perfect
right.
process isn't going to show you how well it can work. So I don't know.
No,
What
no.
would you do? I think, would you do? We talk a lot about policy as code, and I sort of
Right.
wonder, what kinds of policies might you pick? Would you have an AI agent monitor the security configurations of an application? Would you have it monitor a credit process or a KYC process in a bank? I don't know. What would you start
That's a
with?
good. That's a good question. Actually, I kind of lean on regulatory processes for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, I think you brought up all good examples in all places where it could apply, but for some reason, I tend to go to regulatory processes and compliance. And I don't know why. Just for whatever reason, my mind happens to go there.
Right.
I know it's non-trivial ingesting all this information from a whole bunch of different variety of sources, but I do love your manufacturing analogy because I think that's actually spot on. I think the subtle, I shouldn't say, the difference is manufacturing is they understand the necessity of doing that given the volume of what they're creating and wanting to do that, and their employees are they couldn't operate otherwise. It's like you need that information in order to create the product. Whereas I think on when these things are more compliance and regulatory driven and they're more ad hoc, the mindset of the individual is a little bit different. That I have to be an attorney to do this. I can't relinquish my control to a machine, which is effectively what you're doing. But I do think you're spot on. I think also for the first time we can do knowledge type and very complex knowledge type work with these models. But also the bigger issue, the bigger thing here, and you and I have spoken about this a million times, is being able to parse unstructured data in a very effective way. And that is really, to me, the big, profound change here. That I can look at text content, and that is really it. And I can assess that content, and I can extract key information from that content and make decisions off that content. Which is very different than a highly structured sensor returning, a series of numbers.
Yeah. No, imagine here's a really simple example, but this one is easy to get my head around at least. So imagine you have an internal policy that just says that, for expense requests, approval requests over a certain amount of money, or let's say expenditure approval requests over a certain amount of money, you need multiple levels of sign off. And your policy might say just include those
Right,
sign offs in an email thread and then send it to your procurement specialist, right? Um, Today, that procurement specialist, that human being, would be reading through the email and saying, okay, who signed it? And oh, I'm not familiar with Bob over here, and they might have to go to the org chart and they might have to see, is Bob actually the line supervisor of the person he's approving for, or does he have the approval authority?
Right,
Or maybe someone got promoted. They're like, wait a minute, I didn't know Jane was the CXO. Does she have signing authority on this? I got to go check, right? Eh, So
right,
it might take you a minute to scan the email, or it might take you 10 minutes if you have a lot of open questions, right? You could very
right,
simply have a bot that is focused on that particular part of the compliance process. It reads the entire email thread. It can check the spending authority, the approval authority, the reporting lines, and everything else of all the people involved. It can read and see if there are
right.
any open questions in the thread that weren't answered, any qualifiers like I approve, but make sure you do this first or something like that. It could read all of that and just instantly come back to the compliance specialist and
Right,
say, ready to go, or here's some things you should go look at. Now, that's a
right.
trivial example because that's a simple process I described. But even there, you can see, to your point about ingesting documents, it could read and understand these emails, and it could pull in information from other systems, the org charts, who's got what signing
Right.
authority, et cetera, and just do that legwork for the procurement person so they know whether they're ready to sign off or not on a spending request.
No, I think that's a great example. And again, so much of the information we look at is it's all this unstructured data or unstructured data. It's email, it's text, it's things that traditional approaches had a hard time extracting information out of it. I remember going through a project years ago when I was at a bank and we were trying to take information out of a text chain between two individuals that were discussing trading, and they were trying to execute a trade, and we were trying to extract information out of that in order to build what would have been a trade, a line, I'm sorry, a content to generate a trade, and the individual just had to do it. And at first glance, you're like, oh, this isn't that hard. But when you dove into it, the complexity was tremendous. And we rapidly realized after doing this for a couple of weeks and using traditional models that it was a non-starter. You just simply couldn't do it with any sort of reliability. And I think now with the Gen AI, it's those types of problems of looking through unstructured legal documents and laws and regulations and everything else is now eminently doable. And doable, especially now if you augment it with your own fine-tuned model or some kind of RAG infrastructure to get much higher accuracy. It's a game changer, and you can
Yeah.
save company
Well,
millions and millions and millions of dollars.
it's a massive game changer, and I think that it's easy for people who haven't tried this to underestimate just how freakishly complex human
Right,
language is in terms of the way we use it every day. And if you doubt
right,
that, look at all the different fields where humans
right,
have created a very specific subset of language to try to remove ambiguity, whether it's the way that legal documents
right,
are written or the way that certain scientific reports get written. We've
right,
our language is so flexible. So now imagine back to your example of two people sending messages back and forth discussing some sort of a financial deal, and maybe in that message thread they talk about another option, right? And they're not going to keep spelling out the options. They're not saying option,
right,
this option heretofore known as option B, and right, they're going to go, well, if we did it this thing or that thing, if we did it the first way or the second way, maybe
right,
we do your idea, not mine. It's and they're talking about the same things, and they know what each other mean,
right,
but
right.
getting a traditional language parsing model to keep track of the thing or the other thing versus labeled,
Hard.
specific facts. Holy cow, is it hard? And yet, large
It's
language
very
models
hard.
are freakishly good at interpreting and understanding and following the thread of this conversation, even though we
Yes.
as humans are ridiculously inconsistent the way we use language.
Oh, absolutely. No, and that's exactly it. And I think that, the takeaway here, if I'm a CFO or somebody at the C level controlling budget for all of this, the thing you have to think about is, and maybe I think a lot of organizations are still deploying things like Copilot around the periphery, and they're using it and embedding in their applications a little bit, and PowerPoint and emails, and they're getting some of the benefits of it. But if I'm sitting at the top and going, how do I really use this stuff to make it really a game changer? I hear about these companies that are, starting to really embed it. Like, what do I do? And I think you have to wrap your mind around that you can use this technology way deep in your processes to really be a game changer. in ways that
Yeah.
maybe you hadn't originally thought about. And that's the key thing. You've got to really, really think about your internal processes and procedures, and how can I start using these tools to make them go better, faster, proactive, less expensive, whatever it may be. And that to me is the key thing I want individuals to walk away from.
And I like the fact that you chose the CFO as as your exemplar of if you were selling to someone, how would you explain this? Because the other thing the CFO is always going to ask you is why, right? What's the benefit?
Right.
Why am I doing this? And I don't know, how would you answer the why question?
Well, it's funny. The CFO, I like it, to them. It's always about dollars and cents. It always invariably comes down to that, which is not always the best case in the world, to be honest. It's a good case in many cases, but it's not always the best case. I mean, I go to the CFO and say, look, obviously I'm going to save you on just, we'll go for consulting costs with one of the consulting firms to do this for you, which is going to save you millions of dollars. But more importantly, the risk of, and this is harder to quantify, of not getting fined, of not going through a process, of not dealing with external attorneys and lawyers and everything else, and you're going to save on that. I also try to look at it a little more, I think, differently. You're going to take processes which are arguably painful, a tax on your organization, and this is a little more difficult to quantify. You should get a massive uplift in productivity from your individuals. Because if I'm pulling
Yeah.
a me or you off a project for 2 days to talk to attorneys about compliance, well, that's a lot of our time walking away doing things that are arguably non-productive. I mean,
Yeah.
somebody can argue they're productive, but they're really non-productive to the core mission of the firm. They're a necessity to the firm operating. And to me, that's the better case. I can take people that are doing real good, hardcore, productive work, and now move them. I don't have to move them off anymore. They're back to doing real, hardcore, productive work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like that point a lot. So obviously there is the whole reduced risk, better safety, better outcomes part that you mentioned. There's the financial part, and let's be clear, the financial part can be huge. I mean, that may be all you need to
Right,
convince some people to do it. We know that currently estimates are that a medium level, not super complex agent, but a normal agent running for a year at current pricing will cost most organizations around $20,000 for a year. And this is an agent
right,
working not 2,080 hours a year, working 24/7, 365. It's never
right,
not working. And
right,
depends on how complex it is and what price you've negotiated. But around think of $20,000 as a benchmark, right? You're not going to hire anyone to do this work onshore, offshore, anywhere at that capacity
right.
with that level of expertise for $20,000. But let's go back to what you said about productivity, because I think that's maybe the best gain. It impacts people in terms of, I think, happiness, right? I mean, I don't know
Right.
if you're like me, yeah, but man, when I have to start reading email threads and checking for compliance to a process, and oh, I can't even say it without nodding off, right? My happiness,
Right.
it just goes down. I'm
Plummets.
miserable. I hate that stuff,
I hate
right?
that.
Like,
So do I.
I want to be creating things. I want to be doing meaningful work. And yet, how much of
Absolutely.
everybody's day is pulled into things that are essential but not meaningful, and your happiness plummets. And when your happiness plummets, your productivity plummets. Your
Right.
longevity at the company plummets. I mean, look, I'll confess, I quit big corporate
Yeah.
life because I couldn't stand, as a senior executive, spending massive quantities of my time doing things that weren't meaningful. Um,
Oh, absolutely. You and
yeah.
I both. This is why we're doing this.
Yep.
This is
So
exactly
the
why you and
hidden
I are doing
benefit of
this.
this is the hidden benefit of this that you just hit on is you make your people happier. It goes back to, like, not only are
Right.
you not spying on them, you actually possibly could make their life better and let them spend their brain power in the things you actually hired them to do.
Right. Right. And that is it's a bit of an intangible, but I think we all know it when we see it. We know employees that are happy and love their jobs and have no problem going into it. I don't know if agents are panacea for the world's problems, but not doing grunt work, not doing this type of work. And for most of us, and you and I, look, we We've sat in countless of these meetings, and you sit there, and they're like watching paint dry. It's the most painful meeting you could sit in, and you're getting drilled about things that you can care less about. That, and then you walk out of the meeting, and it's not like you're going to context switch and immediately go to, okay, I'm happy again. I can go back to doing what I'm doing. You drag for the rest of the day. You realize how much
Right.
productivity it sucks out of you to do this stuff, and it's a number that is very hard to quantify, but I feel like, especially in finance and highly regulated industries, finance, pharmaceuticals, that number seems to go up every year because there's always new regulations, there's always new requirements that are being imposed upon these firms
Right.
in the name of safety, and it's more and more and more costly every single year. And how do you get rid of that or get in front of that?
I don't think there's an industry out there where the amount of, whether it's regulations or internal policies or best practices or safety rules or whatever, but like they only go one direction. They only increase, right? Like rarely do
Right,
you see
like
someone
taxes.
say, "Oh, we don't care about this rule anymore. Let's get rid of it." So
No,
yeah,
no, no, no.
good point. Like we're getting to the point, or we'll continuously edge closer to the point where it just becomes so hard to keep up with everything and to operate with the level of perfection that you need to. That why wouldn't
Right.
you offload some of that grunt work? And here's an interesting data point for you. So I can see people saying, yeah, but how much do employees really care about this happiness? David, are you living in a utopian dream world where like the rest of us work in a world where like we just suck it up and go to work every day and we know we're not happy with stuff we're doing,
Right.
but it's what we do. Um, Here's something I read a few months ago that really has stuck with me, and I think about it a lot. And it was a study done by a research organization that concluded that more than two-thirds of surveyed people in knowledge worker positions were using AI tools outside of the
Yep.
visibility of the remit of their company. In other words, they were paying for and using AI tools on their own to do their job without company approval, without it being supplied or endorsed by the company.
Right.
Now, you could say, shame on you, you're violating your company policies by doing that. Maybe that's true and you shouldn't do that. I agree. But what it really points to is people want the help. People see this as a way to
Right.
lessen the drudgery, and they're even willing. I mean, maybe they're on the $20 a month plan of their favorite AI model. Some of them I know are on the $100 a month or $200 a month plan, but these are people who are dipping into their own pocket and
Mm.
using these tools because it just makes their life more enjoyable. It makes their work more
Oh,
productive, and they
100%.
want to produce.
Yeah, I honestly, and maybe that's naive, but I think most people want to do their job. They want to do it well, and they want to produce work. They don't want to sit and do drudge work. I mean, granted, some of it's a necessity. You're not going to eliminate it all, but some of this work, which seems utterly pointless sometimes, and a necessity. Yeah, I mean, getting at it, and it's interesting. Another little piece of interesting information. There is, I mean, we look at it as an operational expense, this type of work, but this can switch from an opex to a capital expenditure and actually get value out of some of this stuff too, because there is certainly value gained, I would think, from some of this information that you're acquiring from all these different sources, and maybe you could turn it around
Right.
and take a situation that has always been a tax into something a little bit more positive, some different way of looking at it. But I agree with you 110%.
Good.
Eliminating the drudge work, there's a lot of positives that come out of that at the end of the day.
Yeah. And look, it's not just about the employee. Like, yes, the employees are happy or the drudge work is eliminated or reduced at least. But
Right.
going back to something you said earlier, it's also better for the company as a whole. It's better for the management because you're getting proactive insight into what's happening. You're getting, near
Right.
real time visibility into how things are operating. And here's what's really cool. It doesn't have to be black and white. It doesn't have to be this process is compliant 96% of the time. 4% of the time it's fails my compliance checks, right? That's a good metric to know if that's what's happening, but it doesn't have to be that black and white. It could just be, hey, here's a change that we see happening in the way people are working. Like you might use
Right.
this electronic monitoring and assessment of ongoing work to detect that people have changed something about the way that they're working, and that
Yeah.
change is, look, people are smart. People are very intuitive. People are very receptive to what's going on in the world around them. And sometimes that change is because they might intuitively recognize that something hasn't worked right, or they might intuitively recognize that something is changing. Like imagine someone who is like keeping their finger on the zeitgeist of, national news or news in their
Right.
industry, and they realize, hey, maybe I should start including this extra section in my proposals to clarify that I am mindful of this thing that's in the public discourse. Right.
Right.
That's tremendously, but that happens at the organic level because a person decides it's the right thing to do. It's not in a policy
Right.
somewhere. It's not an official stated position of the company. But as
Right.
a senior manager in the company, I would love to know that those things are starting to happen because it gives me an opportunity to say, hmm, good idea. Should this be an official position of the company? Should we actually formalize that, yes, you
Right.
should talk about
Right.
this topic in a proposal, for example? So it's this feedback loop about not just are humans doing what you want them to do, but what are the humans doing differently that might be feedback for the company on how it should operate.
Interesting perspective. I hadn't even thought of it that way, but I think you're absolutely correct. As any part of these embedded processes, embedded AI processes, you're certainly going over quite a bit of information. So, being able to make those types of assessments, and I think is wise and prudent. Because I would want to know. I'd want to know if something's,
Yeah.
somebody, I didn't know. I hate to say it didn't exist. An employee was doing some great work and we weren't aware of it. I would certainly want to know that and want to capture it and want to be able to replicate it. And there are how many employees doing great work, acting on their own accord, making decisions that it's not part of a policy, but just through the day to day, they understand that this needs to get done to get it done right. Capturing that and quantifying it and using it and expanding on it to me
Yes.
and that's the stuff you can pick up through all these models. You can, just
Right.
take that information and use it within your firm. And there are, again, from sitting at the top, I'm looking at, there are thousands of processes in our firm. There are
Yeah.
thousands of places to apply this type of thinking,
Absolutely.
and it's not
I
just limited
think
to compliance and regulatory stuff.
Yeah, we're talking about something that could be transformative. Now, I think you start back to where we start. You start with the basics. You start with picking a, process that has
Right,
a high degree of standardization, and you use an agent to monitor how reality is reflecting the goal, the policies,
right.
procedures, etc. But, everything we're talking about is very, very doable, very achievable, and creates, sort of the goal everyone's always had, even before AI, of like the learning organization. Um, I think in a way
Right,
what AI
right,
gives you, right? AI gives you a window into what people are doing and writing and thinking in an organization where the doing, the writing, and the thinking is the product, right? Just like
right,
equipment monitoring and telemetrics give you a window into how your plant is operating or how your distribution network is
right.
functioning. It closes that blind spot into what knowledge workers are doing and what their output looks like.
That's a brilliant way of looking at this. And again, I hadn't wrapped my mind around looking at it that way. It's usually companies are looking at a series of metrics within their organization to see how people are producing, whether it's a survey or it's this or it's that.
Right.
And those things are point in time, and they're very often scalar in nature. You're not seeing the variability. You're not capturing the variability of human nature and language. And I would venture to guess if you were using some of these tools to really understand your employees very well in a positive way. I want to be clear here, not to spy on employees, but in a
No.
positive way. You're going to get a lot more information about your organization, and if you use that information wisely, there's a lot you can do with it in a positive way. Again, I don't want to say you're spying on your employees. You're reading all the tech. That's not what we're suggesting here. But looking at work product, looking at certain pieces of information through embedded AI processes and parsing apart this information, there is a lot of good that, if you use it well, can come out of this. And so you need to control the agents. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong. There need to be processes around that as well. But there's a lot of positive that can come out of this if you're smart about it.
Yeah. There is no doubt a potential dark side to this that you have to watch out for. You
Right.
just hit on it, right? This privacy violation potential. So I think, you're not going to jump into this without having, I think you need to have a very clear set of ethics guidelines that you implement internally. How are you going to use AI? How are you going to use data?
Right.
What are you going to do to be on the ethical right side of things? And I think the ethics
Right.
is really important because technically, legally, in the United States, especially, most companies have very broad privacy disclosures that their employees acknowledge. They almost don't even know they're acknowledging it sometimes, but you log in the morning and there's this little privacy
Right.
disclosure on your screen. And at the end of the day, companies have a legal right. In the US, it's not the same in every country, but companies have a legal right to collect information about you and about the way you're doing your job. Um,
Right.
that doesn't mean that it feels good. It doesn't mean that it's ethically okay. And this is we've seen this,
Right.
in COVID. We had companies, look at the pushback when people started monitoring badge swipes and time at desk and
Right.
things like that. People are like, you're measuring how often I move my mouse, not how much work I do. Um,
Yeah, I know. Right. I
there's
know.
right. And it came up with great terms like coffee badging, still one of my favorite terms, but um, to
Yep.
arise out of COVID at least. But yeah, so I
Uh,
think you're right. The security concerns about how does this information get used? Are you protecting it? The privacy concerns, like these are real, and you've got to be very mindful about this in order to really start implementing these kinds of agents.
no, 100%. I think, yeah, like you said, having the right set of controls in place is beyond critical because you don't want to use this information in an improper fashion. I mean, granted, yeah, for compliance processes, it's a very specific function, but I think for some of this other stuff we're discussing, you need to have a high level of control over it because I would say there'd be nothing worse than, when you know you're being monitored closely, it's extraordinarily discomforting.
Yep. And this is where I have to put in
Yeah.
my standard plug for AI safety and ethics, and it is this. And
Yes.
I'll repeat this until the day I expire, I think. But yes, there are legal issues that AI raises, and you do need to deal with those. There are cybersecurity issues
Yes.
that AI raises, and you do need to deal with those. But if you treat AI as a legal and cybersecurity challenge, you are missing the boat. There is a ethics and AI safety and
Right.
responsible AI aspect to this that goes beyond what is simply permissible or technically safe to do. And so if you do not have a responsible AI program, if you do not have an AI safety and ethics function, you should be talking to people like us about how to do that because it's
Right.
absolutely essential. And if you are deferring this and saying, well, I'll let the legal team look at it, they are not going to look at everything that you need to be considering, nor is your cybersecurity team, nor is your compliance team. If you don't have
No.
that ethical overlay, that responsible AI overlay that brings together legal and risk and compliance and all these other functions, you are still massively exposed to the risk of using this incorrectly.
I could not have articulated that better myself, and you are absolutely correct. You're absolutely spot on. Only thing I'll add to that is if you go down this path of not doing it that way or not being aware of some of the broader issues, you're setting yourself up for a for failure or a
Yeah.
painful realization at some point that you've used it in an inappropriate way or you've done harm when you certainly didn't intend it that way. And it's not to say it's done with intention. Very often these things happen without intention and with good intentions, just it wasn't thought through. You need to be aware of the consequences of acquiring and evaluating some of this information.
And
And
let
that's
me give
all I
let
can
me
tell.
make it real for people. If you look in the last 6 months, and I'm not going to mention names of people or companies here, but it will be pretty obvious, I think. Look in the last
Right,
6 months. Look at the largest loss of corporate value events that have occurred. Some of these have been the largest single day or single week losses in history, right?
right,
And these were suffered by companies who did not do anything illegal. They did not release products that injured people. They did not break securities laws, right? It was because of reputational damage. They were
right,
discovered or perceived as having acted irresponsibly, as having acted unethically, as having been shady,
right,
as having been biased or even racist in situations. This will
right.
cost you more money than a regulatory fine. This will cost you more money than a security breach. If you screw this up, if you are perceived with the help of your AI, for example, as acting unethically, your stock price, if you're a publicly traded company, will plummet. This is not, we're not saying this because it's the nice thing to do. We're saying it because this is the quickest way to destroy value in a company is to behave unethically and irresponsibly. And AI gives you lots of ways to do that if you're not careful.
Right. And it doesn't mean don't embark on these programs because they're incredibly important, but it does mean be smart about it. It does mean have the right processes and procedures and controls in place because, like you said, and plus, once your corporate reputation is damaged, recovering that reputation, even if it had been acquired over many decades, as we've seen, you can lose it in a span of days, and getting it back can take years.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
It's so you can expect to have me to
anyway,
see me repeat some flavor of that message periodically for the rest of my life. Um, but on a
yes.
lighter note, Peter, we
Likely no.
a few weeks ago we talked about the impact of AI on the legal profession. And we got a
Yes.
lot of feedback on that. It was an interesting conversation. And I think when we said that, we said, look, we're not
Right.
picking on the legal profession as like the only industry to be
Right.
impacted. It was just one that we've talked to. So we're going to turn that lens on something closer to home. You
Mm-hmm.
want to talk just a little bit about what we're going to be talking about next time?
Yeah, I think we're going to embark on a conversation about consulting companies. And I think, more specifically, something that you and I have probably, and we'll broaden out the topic when we talk about it, I'm sure, but there's the aspect of consulting, of offshoring many processes and procedures and development, I think is one thing we will certainly be speaking about. But just the broader impact on consulting businesses, and I'll say more specifically technology consulting firms, but we can broaden that out. And the impact it's going to have on that.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's only fair. Gave uh we gave the legal profession their moment under the spotlight. So let's turn the lens on ourselves and
yes.
really look at like like do you need a consulting industry in the future? How is AI gonna impact the consulting industry? And it's wild. It's something we obviously do a lot of thinking about. It's something, and
Mm-hmm.
again, I don't want to foreshadow too much. It's something we're actually trying to do for ourselves is, work with
Right.
AI as a part of the way we deliver services to our clients. And we can already
Mm-hmm.
see it's going to have a big impact.
Oh, massive impact. And I think we're only, like I said, you and I talk about this and ideate over this virtually constantly. And the impact is going to be, I think, quite traumatic. And not in ways that are
So if
initially out there. I think it's going to be far bigger than that.
Yeah. So look, if you're a consultant, especially if you're in the beginning of your career or you're someone who's in university and you're thinking about becoming a consultant, watch the podcast next week. If you're a senior level
Yes.
consultant and you are nervous or thin-skinned, do not watch the podcast next week because you might be concerned about, you know, your life choices. No, I'm over dramatizing it. It's not all bad news. I think there is a path forward, but it will not look exactly the same as it does today. That's an easy thing to say
No.
because no industry is going to look exactly like it does today. But
No,
yeah,
but
so
I think
join
it'd
us
be
next
good to put
week.
out our thoughts. Yeah, no, please. I think you and I have some real interesting takes on the future of this industry. So please join us, and obviously we'll leave it at that. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and as always, we love questions. Please feel free to reach out. We're
Yeah.
always we love insight. We love other people's opinions, and we love to know how we're doing. So David, I think that was, as always, another great conversation. And obviously, I look forward to our next one.
All right, that's a wrap for today, Peter. Fantastic talking to you again, and see you next week
Always.
on Call Me Data.
I'll see everybody next week. You have a great week. Take care, David. Have a great week.
Bye. Thanks for watching Call Me Data. If you enjoyed our podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us on YouTube, and make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.